Imagine facing brutal heat on the open sea, under the unforgiving tropical sun, with no shade, no breeze, and your skin burning while your lips crack from thirst. No fresh water, no light clothes, no escape from the heat. In this episode, we uncover the improvisations, suffering, and survival of those who defied the sun and wrote history with their own scorched skin. During the height of maritime expansion, long voyages regularly crossed tropical regions near the equator. Routes like the Gulf of Guinea, the Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean were notorious for extreme heat, high humidity, and unpredictable weather. Sailors often spent weeks or months beneath the scorching sun with no real protection. Ships like caravels and naws built of dark wood absorbed heat relentlessly. Their exposed decks and sealed interiors became ovens. Without proper ventilation or thermal knowledge, life aboard was harsh. Heat fatigue was common, made worse by limited access to fresh water and spoiled rations. These conditions weren't just unpleasant, they posed real health risks. The deck, where most sailors worked, offered little escape. Few shaded spots existed, and comfort was never a design concern. Under relentless heat, men labored hour after hour, sometimes day after day, with no real cover. No sails or canopies were fixed for protection. Sailors had to improvise, hanging scraps of worn-out sails, draping patched cloths, propping up barrels or crates to cast even the smallest shadow. Sometimes they rigged torn sails between masts, or tied cloths between ropes to make basic sunshades. But these makeshift shelters were flimsy, unstable, and rarely held up long against the elements. Below deck was no refuge either. The hold offered shade, but at a high cost. Intense heat, no air, and stifling stench of rot, fish, gunpowder, and filth. Many preferred facing the sun on deck to enduring the suffocating conditions below. When all else failed, sailors hid behind thick masts, crouched between cargo, or curled near wooden crates, always chasing a brief moment of relief. This was no beach holiday with a cocktail in hand. Clothing only made it worse. The sailors of the era endured the blazing sun in garments that today would seem completely unsuitable. Most wore heavy wool or coarse linen, not by choice, but due to the lack of alternatives. Lightweight, breathable fabrics were rare or too expensive for common sailors. Despite the heat, it was normal to keep most of the body covered. This wasn't modesty, but protection. Leaving skin exposed meant burns, peeling, and infections. Dressing lighter simply wasn't a safe option. To protect their heads, sailors made do with what they had: makeshift straw hats, cloths wrapped as turbans, or soaked rags draped over shoulders and necks. Ingenuity was their only accessory. As for their feet, most sailors went barefoot. Leather boots or shoes were scarce and typically reserved for officers or high-status passengers. The sun-heated, splintered deck injured their feet, but it was the cost of making the journey. Fresh water was more precious than gold. Stored in large wooden barrels, it was strictly rationed. Over time, the water warmed, turned murky, and took on the taste of the barrels and any impurities collected inside. Still, it was all they had, and only for drinking. Bathing was unthinkable. To cool off, they turned to seawater. Buckets were filled and poured over their heads, hoping for momentary relief. The instant refreshment was welcome, but short-lived. Salt would dry on their skin, leaving behind an itchy crust that worsened wounds. But when the choice was between this and passing out from heat, the answer was obvious. Some soaked cloths in water and placed them on their necks or heads. A small ritual under the tropical blaze. Of course, when fresh water ran low, even this became a luxury. Drinking seawater was out of the question. Sailors knew, even without full understanding, that it didn't quench thirst. It made it worse. Dehydration would accelerate, causing delirium, vomiting, and even death in severe cases. Surviving the heat at sea wasn't about comfort. It was about adapting, enduring, and holding on one day at a time under the merciless sun, the biggest enemy of food at sea wasn't scarcity, it was heat. In tropical regions, the stifling conditions aboard ships caused provisions to spoil rapidly, even those meant to last. Sailors' rations, already limited to hard biscuits, salted meat, and dried beans, became nearly inedible in the intense heat. Preservation depended almost entirely on salt. Meat and fish were packed with as much salt as possible to keep them from rotting. Still, the high temperatures below decks or on the main deck often led to foul smells, mold, and even maggots. Meat could become slimy, and the biscuits, when not infested with insects, turned rancid in the humidity. Beyond the revolting taste and texture, these conditions directly impacted the crew's health. The excess salt used for preservation made sailors constantly thirsty, a serious problem when fresh water was strictly rationed. Heat only intensified this effect, leaving men even more dehydrated and fatigued. Eating became as much a mental struggle as a physical one. Filling the stomach was important, but keeping food down despite the taste and smell took near heroic effort. Prolonged exposure to tropical heat at sea brought more than discomfort. It posed a real threat to survival. Isolations, sudden collapses were common and often continuous. With no proper protection, sailors spent days under the blazing sun, pushing their bodies to the limit. The consequences: high fevers, pounding headaches, sudden fainting, and even hallucinations. Some men, in the grip of feverish delirium, leapt into the ocean, believing they saw land. Dehydration became chronic. With little fresh water and a diet soaked in salt, the sailors' bodies quickly broke down. Skin cracked, lips bled, tongue swelled and dried out. Urination, if it occurred, was scarce, dark, and painful. Heat drained what the body most needed, and there was little to do but endure. The heat also worsened already common illnesses. Scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, progressed faster in weakened, dehydrated bodies. Constant diarrhea from contaminated water or spoiled further increased fluid loss. Skin infections became frequent, especially for sailors wearing soaked clothes for days or even weeks. Some historical accounts mention a phenomenon called sun fever, not officially recognized at the time, but widely observed among crews. It resembled heatstroke combined with neurological symptoms: hallucinations, tremors, confusion, and erratic behavior. To many, it felt like losing their minds to the heat. In such hostile conditions, surviving at sea demanded more than physical strength. It required incredible adaptability. Though the heat took a heavy toll, sailors developed both formal and informal strategies to cope. It was a culture of resilience forged under the sun. Some ships created internal rules to avoid prolonged exposure. Tasks were divided into shifts, allowing some men to rest in whatever shade they could find while others worked. This rotation was essential to avoid collapses during labor. Veterans knew exactly where to position themselves to escape the worst angles of the sun. They instinctively recognized the most dangerous hours, the least stifling corners of the ship, and small tricks that made a big difference, like soaking clothing or using ropes and cloth to create makeshift barriers. Sailors also formed unwritten codes of conduct, sharing survival tips, looking out for younger crewmates, and rotating jobs whenever possible. One day carrying barrels in the sun, another assisting in the galley or doing repairs below deck. It was a way to keep morale and health barely manageable. This practical wisdom didn't come from books. It came from experience, pain, and direct observation. On board, experience was the most valuable asset. A sailor who knew how to find shade was almost as essential as one who could tie the right knots. Today, many people go on cruises precisely seeking sun, sea, and tropical weather. Deck chairs, pools, air conditioning, and cold drinks are the modern definition of relaxation. But centuries ago, that same environment was the exact opposite of paradise. For the sailors of the age of exploration, heat was a daily torment. Number: shade, no comfort. Just burning sun, scorched skin, scarce water, and constant exhaustion. Still, they endured not for leisure, but for survival, and often by duty. And even in the worst conditions, those voyages changed the world.